You are listening to the West Michigan Sports Show here on News Radio WBRN. Brandon Wirth joining you here this Saturday on News Radio WBRN. Thank you all for wherever you're tuning in from, whether you're with us here on 96.5, 107.7, or 1460, as well as WBRN.com and the WBRN mobile app. If you ever missed this show, you're out of town on a Saturday, away from your phone, away from the radio, don't worry about it. Log on, WBRN.com or Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Search the West Michigan Sports Show. You can find it on the podcast tab under the website, and you can listen back to every episode that we've had on this show. Pretty cool stuff when you go down to it. So, a lot of great stuff there. We got a great show for you here today. We're not going to be taking a look at the CSAA scoreboard, but I promise we will get back to it in full next week. We're going back to a traditional talk show format today. It was prompted with a question, and this was actually not from anybody on the outside that prompted this question to myself, but it was in my own cranium where this thought had come in mind. So we're going to talk today about analytics. What does it mean in sport? Where's the future going? And should teams be using more of it or less of it at the high school level? Now, of course, college and pro, we know exactly that it's only going to go up. Do high schools follow it, or should we stay old school the way that it's always been? I'll dive into that, all the analytics around the analytics, as well as all of the great things that analytics can bring to your team, no matter what the sport may be. But before we dive in, we got to take a chance and thank all of those that make this show possible. Those include Johnson's Automotive, the Schuberg Insurance Agency, Quality Car and Truck Repair, Alter Care Big Rapids, Paris Auto Sales and Service of Big Rapids, Moda the Macasa Osceola Transit Authority, the Macasa Osceola Career Center, and a new sponsor of the show, Dezos Digital. Thank you guys for your support here of local high school athletics. So, we're going to dig into analytics today, and of course, this will not be entirely my opinion on this subject. I will bring in a lot of data, ironically, around the data in sports, and a lot of it coming from very reputable sites. American University is one that I'll be referencing here in the first part, obviously taking some from college institutions that have students, professionals, professors doing all of the research on these topics by itself. So there's going to be a lot of different angles that you can look at this topic with. And I think really when it comes down to it, it really at the end of the day is going to come down to preference of your coach. Whether it's necessarily they want to be old school, new school, it's going to be completely up to the coach. So no matter what the numbers and data may say, it ultimately comes down to the composure and the decision-making of your leader in that moment of time when it comes to how you approach practice, how do you approach a game, in-game decision-making, as well as preparation going into a contest or a competitive event. It's always going to be down in the brain of a coach, and that's where ultimately the decision will come from. But how can analytics be a tool that you can use? Or is it a tool that we should not be using as much as we do, right? We're going to dive into all of these things. So, analytics, what does that mean for those maybe unfamiliar with the term in the term of sport? Now, analytics is really, in a sense, the use of data to make an informed decision for yourself, your team, your program moving forward from that point of time, right? Analytics tell us a lot of things about what hypothetically will happen at an at-bat, at a race, at a game, at a competition, based on what your team looks like on paper compared to another team, right? A record is probably the number one analytic that we use to make a determination on the outcome of a game before it starts, right? If you have a 15-5 team on one side and a 5-15 team on the other, we're going to make an inferred guess that the 15-win team is going to beat the 5-win team because that analytics tells us with the 15 wins that they are a better team than the 5-win team, right? It's more wins than the other. They have more times than not won a game as opposed to the other team that has lost more games than they have won and they have played that year, right? So we look at analytics all the time, whether we do think we do or that we do not, right? When we look at specific sports, baseball, for example, right, we're in the midst of baseball season. If you're a Tiger fan, hey, little shout out. Come to WBRN. You can listen to every game every single day. They are playing right here on 96.5 and 1460. But when it comes down to baseball, analytics has really become a topic of interest, right? Because baseball is such an analytic-heavy sport, right? Those that have seen the movie Brad Pitt, Moneyball, know what I'm talking about, right? How to assemble a team without even considering who the players are, but what their numbers say that they are, right? It's a really fascinating story. If you haven't watched it, I would encourage you to do that, especially if you're a fan of sport and analytics together. That is where you want to see the whole philosophy of the game changing, right? How technology is determining these players' value based on what they are doing in the game, how much energy they're exerting, what their stats say about certain games, certain circumstances within a game, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. All these things come into play, right? And of course, at the professional level, the college level, now more than ever, with technology advancing in the United States and even worldwide within sport, we're talking about trying to get more data, trying to make more infrared decisions based on that data, right? We're putting chips in footballs, baseballs, softballs, whatever we can to measure bat speeds, exit velo. We're talking about how a player is shooting the basketball in terms of their grip. I mean, we're looking at all these little tiny things with all of this data measurement to make these decisions on what can change, what should change for this player, or what they're doing right and that you should leave alone, even though they might be only holding 2 fingers on the laces of a football as opposed to maybe 3 or even 1. They're getting more spin rotation. They're having a more tighter spiral, more direct line of path on a pass that will more likely be caught as opposed to a wobbling pass, right? All these little things. And the bottom line is, should high school teams use it? And that's kind of what we're going to get into here in the next 15 minutes. But when it comes down to it, right, analytics, in its sense, really when it comes down to it, it's always going to be up to the coaches to decide, right? Every program's coach has been hired for a reason. They are good at what they do. The athletic director, the board of directors, all of those executives in that school trust that coach to get the job done with whatever job they have assigned for them when it comes to goals, right? If it's win a certain number of games, win a championship, grow the program, whatever it may be, right? Because we hire coaches for all different reasons. The bottom line is they trust that coach for decision-making. If they didn't, they wouldn't have hired him in the first place, right? So ultimately, it's going to be a decision that is made by the coaches, right? Are you going to go for it on 4th down, right? That's one of the biggest ones in the NFL, right? Are you going to pinch hit or pinch run somebody in the 6th or the 7th inning, right? There's a lot of these circumstances that you're looking at data all the time to make those decisions. And the biggest argument, and it's fair to say that somebody named Dan Campbell of the Detroit Lions, who know who that is, Detroit Lions head coach here in Michigan, he really has started to make the observation and a lot of the decisions that, analytics are great and all, but at the end of the day, my gut feeling is what we're going on. And so far, it's kind of worked for Detroit, being ultra aggressive, and it's almost looking at the analytics to make the decision against the analytics, right? It's a really interesting concept. And the reality is there has to be a mix at the end of the day. I think a lot of coaches would agree that there has to be a consideration for the data when everything is tight in a coin flip, and there also needs to be a point of time where we say, you know what, we're looking at how this game is flowing or this competition is going, and then we'll make the decision just based on what we feel in that moment, right? There's obviously 2 ends of the spectrum, and a lot of coaches, and I would even argue up to 75% of coaches, I could be very wrong, and I wouldn't mind being wrong on this because I would love to know the data. Maybe I'll send out a survey or do some sort of research on this. If coaches were to be asked, do you rely on the numbers or do you rely on your gut feeling? Many of them will probably say that it's somewhere in the middle, right? They'll look at the numbers, they'll look at the game, and then they'll make a decision based on the difference of the two, right? Some will say that it's all going to be on a gut decision. Some will say it's on analytics, right? There's a lot of the arguments of this. So how will this apply to high school sports? Well, as we continue technology advancements, we are going to see more and more technology introduced, right? We're getting more stats day in and day out here at the high school level. We're talking about necessarily more kind of complex statistics, right? Instead of just looking at somebody's three-point percentage on the basketball court, we're looking at three-point percentage at a stand and catch position, off the dribble, off the catch, all of these different elements to see what this player truly can do in every situation so that we can learn information and we can plan ahead, right? What does the bottom line say of analytics? It really says that your decision, based on these coaches' decisions, right, in the heat of the moment, the data is supposed to, quote unquote, back up that decision or reject that decision, right? there's never going to be a decision, and maybe I'm a little bit out on the limb on this, but I would argue this. I would probably die on a hill that'll say there will never be a moment of time where it's truly going to be a 50-50 decision. There will never be one that is split right down the middle. At the end of the day, it's got to have to be 51 towards one and 49 towards the other option. Has to happen. There's no question it won't. And so there's a lot of argument that is there has to be this point of we need to accept it, but we need to be able to also go back to our gut feeling, right? So that's the basis on what we're talking about here. So we're going to take a break. When I come back, we'll bring back this topic and we'll talk about how much it should be used in sport and how much data that I have found and research has found would agree with this fact. All right, we'll be right back after this here on the West Michigan Sports Show on WBRN. We return here to the West Michigan Sports Show. We're talking analytics here if you're just joining us. So the discussion of should analytics be prominent and in front of teams at the high school level. We've looked at college teams, we've looked at pro teams, and obviously it's been useful. Should high school teams use them? That's what we're going to dive into. We kind of went into the background, what analytics mean, what the decision-making part of analytics is, how it applies directly to decision-making, human judgment, and now we're kind of getting into what can it be used for? Is it worth the time and effort to look into? And is it something that every team should really be investing in, right? The number one thing that I will say in this is I really do like looking at statistics, right? I work in sports media for a living. So when I'm looking at matchups and I'm looking at teams, writing articles, looking at the judgment of a game in a broadcast perspective, right? We're always looking at numbers, right? Helping identify something in a game that a viewer just looking at the game might not see that can help provide a better part of that experience for them, right? Providing that knowledge to make a better understanding for them of the situation during the game and what that means moving forward, right? So, is it something high school teams should use? Bottom line, if you were to ask me this question, I would say absolutely. Now, am I going to say drop everything, go buy 5 cameras so that it films your game and that you get all of this back? I am not going to say that. The thing that I would say about analytics is I think it is a really good tool to help complement decision-making, right? We talked about that a little bit in the first segment of the show. The bottom line is that it's going to be up to every coach. The bottom line is that it's going to be a decision that's going to fall in the medium of that seesaw. There's not going to be a decision, I fully believe, that might be 100% gut, 100% in favor of data. It's going to be somewhere in the middle if you were to ask coaches in a survey format. But the biggest thing is that they're going to continually evolve. They're going to advance, and there's no way to stopping it, right? Especially looking at a lot of journals, all right? Wharton College is one that I certainly looked at. That's a university that's through Pennsylvania. And one of the biggest things that they found when they were looking at analytics is it can boost competitiveness, right? And this was something that especially was studied in the world of sports gambling, right? A lot of these people that gamble on sports are looking at numbers all the time, right? What's a team's record against the spread, with the spread in their favor, right? They're looking at all these numbers to help them make these informative decisions. And the bottom line is a lot of the analytic side is making sports more competitive. And I think it truly is interesting because a lot of coaches might not necessarily see this point of view because when you're looking at a lot of these numbers in a game, you are getting that drive to find that one thing that they might struggle with, right? We can watch hours of film and we can look at 5 pages of analytics and we can find the same decision. On vice versa, you can watch 5 minutes of film. You can look through 50 pages of analytics, and it might be the same amount of time that you find that same problem, right? It's a really interesting idea. But when it comes down to analytics, when you're looking at these numbers, it's making games more competitive because these coaches, these players, these teams are looking for those little pieces that they can use to help their team win. It's making that much more competitive in the sense of how you're analyzing and breaking down an opponent, right? It's truly interesting. I love looking at these, right? So when you're looking at, for example, a softball game, right? You're looking at a left-handed pitcher against a left-handed hitter, and you're thinking about throwing in a right-handed pitcher. Are you going to throw in a lefty that might necessarily be better against left-handed pitchers, right? Might have a better ERA, might have a better whip overall against left-handed hitters. She might be 6 innings into a game, have given up 2 runs and 8 hits. What you're looking at this right-handed pitcher that might have a higher ERA, a little bit more of a volatile whip percentage, but you're looking now at this would be a different look in the terms of the game, right? There's obviously that median that we're talking about, right? Is this something that high school teams should use? Absolutely, they should use the analytics. It should not be something that drives them full to a decision unless that's what they choose to do. But I think that just supporting the decision will make it certainly worth the while, right? And so when it comes down to the benefit of using analytics, you're going to have these things that you're going to be able to measure for your players to help them improve, right? In terms of softball, you're looking at bat speed, right? How can you improve a player's bat speed so they can get the bat in the zone faster based on eyesight and seeing the pitch, right? That's a number one thing that you can use, right? When you're looking at the sport of running, right, you might be thinking, oh, it's just the times they run. That's not true. You're looking at elevation change. How does a runner change their form? How does it change their time overall when there's hills involved, right? Obviously, if there's more hills, there's going to be a slower time. But by how much for that athlete? Are they more stronger on these hills? Is that something you can use in preparation for your conference, your postseason, your regional schedule to be able to prepare those things, right? And we're looking at your course, especially looking at that far and ahead of time, right? You're looking at cheerleading, looking at the degree of difficulty for a routine. That's the bottom line of seeing how your scores are going to pan out. That's one of the biggest things about it, is you're always going to be analyzing those things. So it improves the competitiveness because you're looking at these more in depth. That's definitely number one. There's also a study that I found at American University in Washington, D.C., and this one was primarily looking at how analytics are changing in the world of sport. But I think it's very interesting because obviously it's mentioning more of the pro and college levels that have already really kind of evolved this. But the biggest thing that they look at is it's looking at, especially not necessarily as much in the game, but outside the game, right? How much does a fan engagement number, how improves a team, right? How many people you have in your stands, how much does that improve it? Because we could all agree that more people in the stands for a home team should theoretically make them play better. Is that always the case? No, it is not. It's those things that we're measuring, right? And they're looking at the sport in general, where you're looking necessarily at the data within a game as well on the outside, where you're looking at ticket numbers. You're looking at a lot of these things for sales and marketing and public relations people to help get them to games and all these sort of things. But when you're looking at, like, especially camera tracking systems, because that's one of the number ones that we talked about earlier with the use of some of these platforms, is you're looking at player tracking info, you're looking at the energy they're exerting, you're looking at their efficiency in bodily movement, how can you apply that to a strength and conditioning program. There's a lot of these things. Now, obviously this costs money. So at the end of the day, it's unfortunate that high schools are not going to have access to all of these tools, right? Unfortunately, funding can fall the wrong way for smaller schools, and it just won't necessarily be an availability to them in the sense of it. That doesn't mean they can't be successful, right? Because the old methods will still work. Gut decisions still are a good intuition because you have the experience as a coach. You have the experience as a player to make those decisions based on what you've already accrued in historical memory. What does that mean in the sense of moving forward in sport? Analytics are going to be here whether you like it or not. Should you reject them? In my opinion, no. Is it something that you should rely on all the time? Also, no. There has to be a medium when it comes down to it as a coach, as a player, as an administrator. You're looking at a lot of these numbers for your team, and you're trying to make a decision moving forward. So, at the end of the day, analytics are going to be there or not. Your decision to use them is obviously completely up to the coaches, the players, the other persons on your staff. The reality is, I truly believe that analytics will impact your team in a positive way knowing these numbers, right? It can help make those decisions when you have a coin flip and you're not sure what to do. Obviously, you can't go and punch the numbers while a game is going on, but you can look at your team going into that matchup and you can project those situations where you can say, okay, if this happens, we can do this, right? Now, when you look at especially this in recruiting, and this is probably the last piece that I would definitely apply this to because I think it's directly implemented within the world of recruiting, right? We're looking at measurables. We're looking at a lot of these different numbers, right? 40-yard dash. We're looking at wingspan. You're looking at height. You're looking at weight to project the athlete's ability to be a premier elite player or competitor, runner, whatever it may be. The bottom line is it will always be there in recruiting, but at the end of the day, how a player plays and responds mentally, especially in these contests, should also be evaluated in these situations, right? If an analytic says that you should go for it on fourth down, 60% you probably should, 40% you probably shouldn't. If you've went for it the last 2 times and have gotten it, yeah, you should probably go for it again, right? There's always that element within it, but you should also look at your players' chemistry. You should look at your players' overall charisma, the ability to respond mentally to those situations, right? If you have a really resilient team, put that trust in your players, even if you might not necessarily agree with the decision that might be made. If they're telling you to go for it and they're confident, let them go do it, right? That's the bottom line. And as a coach, you should guide your team and you should make those informative decisions. And sometimes it might be that you have to trump your players for the benefit of that game. At the end of the day, everybody's going to be understanding the responsibilities of each other and the implications of that, or at least we hope it certainly is that way. So to sum it up and recap, analytics affects decision-making. It affects the way that starting lineups, and rosters are constructed, and it will forever impact how the game is played moving forward, right? We're looking at a lot more of these things impacting decision-making, and it's going to really, truthfully, and I think a lot of people might be scared of this, it's going to change the sport. Having analytics is going to change the sport because you're going to be looking at a lot of the health numbers as well, and we've seen this now in the NFL, right? They're moving the kickoffs to a UFL style, so that in the sense of looking at player safety, concussions on kickoffs, obviously these players running down and hitting each other head on, that it's going to change the game. And I think that we have to be able to understand that moving forward and that it is going to affect the way that sports are played. Now, at the high school level, is that truly going to change as much as the pro and college styles? I truly believe no, because it's going to lay on the tradition of the game moving forward. And I think that's the way I think we all think it should be, but looking at these other perspectives will also change when we look at analytics on how we're going to construct our teams and what the things we should be good at, what things we should work on based on what your team has evaluated, right? Looking at numbers can be such a huge advantage to be able to see specifically the things that you can't see in a game, looking at the emotions that you are feeling in the game, all the things you're thinking about. You might not be thinking at one pinpoint thing, but you look back at the numbers, then you can find out, hey, we need to work on our bunting efficiency with 2 strikes. We need to look at the situation where we are going to throw a pass in a 2-point conversion and looking at conversion rate, right? We're going to be looking at the end of a volleyball match, and we're going to know which rotation we need to be in when we're looking at the number of rotations likely during a match, right? Those things are always going to impact, and they always should. And I think analytics is a great tool that teams should be able to use and that they should use up to their own discretion to help them make decisions in sport. That's going to do it. Brandon Wirth signing off here on the West Michigan Sports Show. Follow along at WBRN.com for more. And until next Saturday, we'll see you right here on News Radio, WBRN.